Yeah, but it was on well there. Yeah. That's the first time we call it wrong. Yeah, I was sitting in the back of my mom. I remember that. It was long without it. That was the age.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome you all to the Museum of the Albemarle as we celebrate Juneteenth today. Before we get started with our History for Lunch program, I have a few quick announcements. For those of y'all who are here in the auditorium, please just remember to silence your cell phones. And for those of y'all who are joining us on Zoom, please mute your microphone and use the chat for your questions. We'll have a Q&A session for everyone at the end of the lecture. Also a reminder that the next History for Lunch is scheduled for Wednesday, July the 3rd at noon, featuring David Bennett, a curator with the North Carolina Maritime Museums. So he will explore the development of the shad and herring fisheries in the Albemarle Sound, which are one of North Carolina's largest commercial fisheries. Mr. Bennett will make special reference to technological development in these fisheries from their earliest days during the colonial period to their decline in the 20th century. So we hope you join us for his presentation on July the 3rd. Now, today we welcome Barbara Snowden, Currituck County historian, who will tell the story of the heroic Currituck Jack, an enslaved man who recaptured an American ship from the British during the American Revolution. So please join me in welcoming Mrs. Snowden. Thank you.
Happy Juneteenth to all of you. And I appreciate y'all coming out tonight or today to learn a little bit about an American revolutionary hero that really not very many people know about, except for people who've heard the legends and everything that go on in talk about in Currituck. Now, John Jasper White. He's better known as Currituck Jack. He also is known as Negro Jack in the records. And what I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to use the records. I'm going to use the General Assembly records. I'm going to use the wills and deeds to tell you what we know about Currituck Jack and get away from some of the things that, in honesty, we cannot prove, but people have said about Jack for a number of years. David Soselsky, when he's talking about African Americans, men and women in North Carolina maritime history, he talks about how really there has not been that much work done on their part that they played. And that is being changed, though. There are a number of scholars who are working on African American heritage of the American Revolution for the 250th that's coming up. Now, this is a conceptual drawing by Stephen Haynes of what he thought Currituck Jack would look like at the helm of a ship. You notice that there is a marlin spike, and that will be very important in the story as we go through there. It was a dark and stormy night in 1792. Okay, how do I know that? Well, 1792 in February, the weather was so bad that that newspapers wrote about February being the worst month of them ever remembering the time. Further north on the Delaware River, it was frozen. There was snow, rain, sleet, and record cold. And there were a number of gales that came one after another with heavy snowstorms, and it seemed unending. Now, we all know the weather doesn't make the news unless it is unusual. And this was an unusual time. There was a man by the name of Henry White of Knott's Island, and he had a decision to make to send his new two-masted schooner, the Polly, and try to run the British blockade. or he could wait. Now, if he waited, that's what he was facing. So he decided that he would send the Polly out. This was a brand new boat to try to run the blockade. It was filled with pork, peas, and corn. And a little bit later, you'll see the document that lists what they were carrying. Now, on board, crew of 3, Caleb White, who was related to Henry, Sam Jasper, who is going to be later related to Henry too, and a slave named Negro Jack. Now, Henry White knew what he was facing because the last year he had a ship named the St. John that had run the British blockade. It had made it all the way to Spain, and on the way back, that ship had been captured by the British. So he knew what he had at risk. Now, the first time we hear about Jack is in the will of Henry White, the Henry White I'm talking about's father. In 1754, he makes a statement: I leave to my son Henry my plantation and the tract of land whereon I live. I also give my son Henry one Negro man named Jack, to him and his heirs forever. So this is the first documented record of Jack. Now, Henry made that decision. He was going to go up the Gulf Stream. He decided to gamble. Now, why would you gamble? Well, a small fortune was at stake. So on February the 14th, 1780, the Polly set out through Cathy's Inlet for the Gulf Stream. If they could avoid the British blockade and make it to the Gulf Stream, the boat would have an easy way going up to Spain. The blockade at that time strand from Charleston along the American coast. Now, everything's going well. 2 days, they're out at sea. They made the Gulf Stream. They made the great circle that would take them quickly to Spain. On the 3rd day, a privateer shows up. Now, I put the definition of privateer because a privateer is not an official British Navy ship. What happened was that you could have a ship and you could get a letter of marque during war that allowed you to capture the enemy. And if you captured them and you could turn them into the Admiralty, you could get the money for that particular ship. Now, the ship that we're talking about was a privateer. The name of the ship was the Thane, and it was under the command of Captain John Atkinson. The Polly first ran because she was not an armed vessel, but with a few shots across her bow, she decided it was more advantageous to stop. She stopped and surrendered to the British ship. Now, Captain Atkinson looked at the ship and said, this is a good ship and it needs to be taken to New York. The reason he was going to take the ship to New York was that was where the Admiralty Court was in session. He left 5 British soldiers on the boat with instructions to sail the boat to New York and turn it over to the Admiralty Court. Well, I told you that the weather was not good. All 4 men were placed on irons on the deck. They were given rations of a 1/4 pint of water and a 1/4 pint of peas uncooked. Jack almost got free in the first day. And when the British sailors saw that, they put White and Jasper in a cabin. They left Jack shackled on the deck. and it is recorded that they were in snow and rain. When Jack almost got free a second time, he was placed in the cabin, still in irons. Now, while they were in this cabin, the men talked. What can we do to make this better? You know that the British had promised any slave who would swear loyalty to Britain could have their freedom. In retrospect, we know that was not completely carried out, but this was what was said. If you're a slave and you will give your loyalty to Britain, then you can be free. So it was decided that Jack should try to work with the sailors there, and he should persuade them that he was going to be loyal to Great Britain. He also tried to persuade them that really he was a good asset. Not only did he know how to sail a ship, he was also a cook, and he could be of value to them. Now, at that point, Jack is on the deck. He is being with his captors, and he is trying to establish himself as, and the quote that is used in the documents is that he was going to be their right-hand man. Okay. With promise of freedom and many rewards that would wait him when they got to New York. I started with the weather. A gale hit, and the ship was stopped for 3 days. They couldn't do anything because the weather was so badly. On February 22nd, the gale went away, and they started back on their way to New York. Jack used that particular moment when the 5 British sailors were involved in getting the ship going, heading back on trail. He used that time to pick up a marlin spike and attack the prize master. He also was fighting at this particular time 2 sailors. White and Jasper were able to get free when all the commotion was on the boat. And as they got free, they attempted to fight the British soldiers. Now, the records use these words. It was a bloodbath on both sides. They did not expect Jack to attack them. It was worse, contrary to their expectations, and it worsened with the marlin and the spike. Now, that is a handmade 18th century marlin spike. Any of you want to try to fight a man with that? I think you can see that it is a very, very good weapon. And remember, you have 3 men fighting 5 men. This is a diorama that the North Carolina Museum of History did about Jack back in when we had the bicentennial, and they did an exhibit on Blacks in the American Revolution. But it gives you an idea of what it was like on that ship. Now, according to sworn statements of Samuel Jasper, they subdued all 5 British sailors, put them in the cabin below, and decided because they were off the entrance to the Chesapeake Bay, they were going to turn in and go to Annapolis. Now, why Annapolis? Well, at this time, the Continental Congress was meeting in Annapolis, and they decided that they were going to turn the ship over to Congress. They did that. They took the ship into Annapolis and turned it over to Congress. When we know that when Congress heard about what Jack had done, He thanked them, the Congress thanked him, and learning of his part in the struggle suggested that the owner give him his freedom. Sounds like a good thing. Guy just saved your ship, saved your crew. Well, we go home. By the way, Jack was so frostbite that he could not go home for 5 weeks. It's recorded in the records. Couldn't walk as a result. But there's a change in ownership. Sometimes I'm getting up in close to my 80s, and as you get older, sometimes you get grumpy, and sometimes dementia comes in a little bit. Well, that happened to Henry White, and Henry started abusing Jack. I don't know why he chose Jack to be the one that he abused, but he did. And Jack, the records say he abused him somewhat. So Jack went to Caleb White and asked, "Can you buy me from Henry White?" And Caleb agreed. Now, the Port of Currituck records, the Mariner's records show that Caleb White was still sending ships out. John Jasper White was the master of these ships, and Samuel Jasper, in his record to Congress, said that John Jasper had been taking his ship out for 5 years. So he was making money for both the White and the Jasper family. And he was very active in his maritime records. In 1787, Caleb White makes a will. And in that will, he gives Jack his freedom. But he has to pay for it, £100. Now, Jack made money for his masters. Jack was able to keep some of that money. That was usually the normal. There was a little bit that was left, he was allowed to keep. It took him 4 years from the time of when the will was recorded in 1788 until he had enough money to pay and buy his freedom. Now, Samuel Jasper goes to the assembly, the General Assembly, state legislature, and in the process applies to have Jack made a free man. In that, he tells everything that happened. In his sworn testimony, he said that he'd taken it. He was making money from the ship. That he was at this point. He makes the comment that he was a good man. That great honor in the name of humanity and highly merited much greater reward than that of emancipation, a service of no less than taking prisoner the whole crew of a British privateer and releasing his master, together with making the said British privateer a capture of the United States. Then he goes on to describe Jack's character as honest and industrious, very manly and mannerly to all. So Jack has his freedom. What's he going to do? Well, as a slave, all of his livelihood had been provided for. A place to live, food, berths on the ship going out. The next thing we find in 1797, John White, who was the orphan of Henry White, sells 1 acre of land to John Jasper White and to lease 4 additional acres. For some reason, these deeds are listed twice in the deed book. I'm not sure why. But John Jasper White goes and builds a house on Indian Creek on Knott's Island. That creek is the creek that goes down between Knott's Island and Mackey's Island. And we know that he is living there because in the 1800 census, we know that is listed as John Jasper White, his wife Rose, and his 2 children. He's living next door to John White. And the reason we were able to find this particular place is because in Henry, go back to that 1754 will of Henry White, going back 1 generation, the land had to be divided and the sheriff had to come in and make the division between the sons of Henry White. And in that deed, that will, when they're taught, the sheriff is making the division, they draw a map and it looks exactly like that, the way the turn in Indian Creek. And we know what property was John White's, and therefore we know where John Jasper White was living. Now, today, if you want to go see where John Jasper White lives or lived, you have to go to the Knott's Island ferry dock and look 5,000 feet over to the northwest, and you'll see where Indian Creek comes out. I don't have a picture of the exact place for a very good reason. The only way to access that today is by an airboat. And luckily, the gentleman at Mackey Island took his airboat out and documented the place for me. Now, what else do we know about John Jasper White? Well, we know from his own, his will, that he owned a schooner and that he sailed that to make money. He went in and out, and he's listed in the maritime records of being the master and owner of this particular ship. Now, I'm going to have to go into lore because I can't prove the next statement I'm going to make. The story is that John Jasper sailed on his boat with 1 white man, and that white man was there. So when he was stopped and he was asked for his papers, he would have that man to give the papers, would present the papers to the regulatory people. Now that we cannot prove. That is just a story that has come down over the years. Now, in John Jasper's will in 1803, he says that he wants his house and his property to be given to his wife, Rose, and the remaining of his property to be sold, his ship and his boat included, and divided among his 2 sons. Now, so therefore we know that John Jasper had his own boat. We know he had his own house and his own property. We know that he was very, very well received in the area. Now, we don't know exactly when he died. He wrote his will in 1803, and it is presented to the court in 1805. And we do know that in 1806, there is an executive order to sell his land. Now, what can we conclude? An African-American sailor earned his freedom at the risk of his own life and to save others. He went on to live a very successful life, well respected in his community, trusted with other people's property and funds at a time when all the odds were against him. That's what I can prove. Now, what can I prove? I can't prove that John Jasper White was a 7-foot, 300-pound man, but that's what the stories say. I cannot prove that he owned not only land on Knott's Island, but that he owned land in the area of the courthouse. But again, that's what the legends say. Most of the legends come from the American History Illustrated by Thomas Paramore. Going through this, I found that there were a number of mistakes that I can now document and correct in that. But we find that John Jasper White not only was well respected in the community, it is told that he was a good sailor. It is said that he lived old to an old age. Again, I don't know how old. But in granting Jasper's manumission request, North Carolina General Assembly was required to authorize a full name. And that's why this particular story is called John Jasper White. Now, just so to give you an idea, these are some of the secondary sources that talk about John Jasper White. And the two that have the most interesting, well-read stories are Charles Willoughby, Currituck Jack on Outer Banks Mysteries and Seaside Stories, and in Thomas Paramore's American History Illustrated. Okay, now, what would I like to know about Jack? I would like to know what happened to his wife, Rose. I would like to know what happened to his two children, because we cannot find any record of them in the records. And I wonder, I would like to know what John Jasper White thought about him doing all of this good work, recapturing the Polly, Congress recognizing him for his work, and then his master not giving him his freedom. All right, are there any questions? Oh, by the way, I brought my research down at the top if any of you want to see the documents that prove what I was talking about. Yes.
And I don't know if this is law, but the children followed the mother as far as, you know, whether Rose was free?
Rose was free, and according to again, do not have proof of this, but according to Paramore, John Jasper White bought her freedom before he married her. Yes. There's no record. And the other thing we cannot find a record of, even though I looked at Annapolis at their newspapers, and I looked at the minutes of the Continental Congress, I cannot find a document that says what the Congress said about John Jasper White. What we have is Samuel Jasper's sworn statement to the General Assembly. And so I assume that if you're going to, you would tell the truth in a sworn statement to the General Assembly. We also, in terms of that, we also have Caleb White. Caleb White's family asked him to write down what happened. And we have that document is attached to the General Assembly records. It's written kind of just one sentence after another. And that document is not only in the General Assembly records, but also was in the White family papers, that a copy of that particular thing.
I think church, I know like this church has black as well as white families, and that is going long way back.
None that I could find. Yes, Elaine. It was sold at public auction, and it went, there's an Etheridge, and the interesting thing about his property is that now it's marsh, and as I said, you have to have an airboat to get there. But if you look on Google Maps, you will see that there is a high ridge there, and it is now owned by the Capps family, and they run cattle there. And if you look at the soil records, it has Roanoke soil, and Roanoke soil is a good soil for growing things. And so he could have made a fairly good living there on that particular property. But the marsh has kind of taken over that area. Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
In researching, I was interested, it said that he was from Tuesday descent, but all of 300 pounds, like you mentioned, so is that restricted?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
He was what, Tuesday descent?
That's what Paramore says. But again, I can't say that because I don't have any proof of it. I tried to hold to the historian's truth is that you have to have primary sources and you have to have 2 or 3 primary sources for every statement that you make. And so I thought about doing the talk this way, standing over here telling you what I could tell you and standing over here and telling you, this is what they say. But again, I'm trying to be more of a historian today than a folkteller. Paramore was a very good storyteller, and so was Charles Willoughby. So that there are things added that again we cannot prove. Yes.
Has anybody gone to the site of his home and tried to do any archaeological exploration?
I had one gentleman the gentleman who took the picture for the airboat over and measured how far it was from the ferry. Look at the site, but basically it's just there's nothing there right now, except as I said, cattle roaming. It would be a good idea if we could. We think, again, when you saw the curve on Indian Creek, we think that is exactly where the houses were. But again, I do not have proof of that. Noah, do you have any other questions? No, they did not record death certificates. Wills are what you get for, and the way you can determine the death, he wrote his will in 1803, but it was not recorded until 1805. And so therefore I'm assuming that he either died in 1804 or 1805, because after a death, and you would, she had it for her widowhood, is the way he said it in his will. So she had lifetime rights to it. And then we do know that his ship was sold, the land and the ship was sold at that time. All right, any other questions? Well, thank y'all for being such a good audience tonight and listening to me on this June 10th. I think it's very good that we had an American Revolutionary War hero from this area, and that we can now document what he did. And I think hopefully there will be more information. I understand the Moayak Library is getting ready to do an exhibit on the documents. And if any of you would like to see the documents, I happen to have them with me today. Okay, thank you very much. Yes.
In the Paramore story, and